country radio and popular radio just doesn't have the heart, doesn't have the connection that these old songs had. They were literally artists versus performers versus people coming into the rhyme game now that just spit out the same exact thing that you heard the other guy do. So I can see why people would become disinterested with it.
Hi, I'm Tim Griggs, and welcome to Why Music Sucks. Our guest today is Joe West, and I'm going to read Joe's bio here. Joe West has a long and distinguished list of production mixing credits, including Shakira, Warren Zevon, Justin Timberlake, EmmyLou Harris, Mercy Me, Steve Earle, Matthew Sweet, Indigo Girls, and many, many more Grammy Award-winning and multi-platinum selling artists. As a songwriter, Joe West has had multiple #1 singles and cuts with artists like Keith Urban, Warrant, I didn't know about the Warrant, Tim McGraw, and many others. Joe won a Grammy for producing Hymns That Are Important to Us by Joey+Rory. Joe owns the West Barn, a timber frame barn studio located on a secluded 15-acre farm in Franklin, Tennessee. And Joe is the founder and lead instructor for Apprentice Academy. So why don't you start off by telling us what Apprentice Academy is?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Tim. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
For those who don't know, Tim and I have known each other for a bunch of years, and we're hanging out in studios. He's famously the lead clapper on the demo for the Tim McGraw song, Right Back at You, Baby. He reminds us of that every year on Facebook.
I do.
So the union dues, or union residuals from that alone must keep you in gold and platinum records.
I am an A-list hand clapper, I'll tell you that. So
the Apprentice Academy was just it's a program I started because I love the, when you think about doing any hobby, it's like riding a motorcycle. You want to go hang out with people that ride motorcycles. You want to ride with people that ride motorcycles and talk about carburetors, talk about straight pipes, talk about handlebars, So that's kind of, I think, the essence of it. And it was me wanting to just hang out and connect with, geek out with other people about it and teach them what I was taught, the way I was taught, which is by hand. That's why it's called the Apprentice Academy and not, something where we don't do any reading. There's absolutely no required reading in the 16-week course. It's all hands-on, old school apprenticeship. And we graduate some guys that are monster engineers. We've got guys that have won Grammys, guys that have been nominated for Grammys. We've got a total of 7 nominations and 3 wins.
Very cool.
Me included in that. I bring them onto my work schedule, and that's the stuff that has been getting nominated. So it's a great fun thing to do selfishly because I like being in that environment. But it's also great to watch the light bulbs go off in people's heads whenever they get it, and to be able to be a part of these guys moving through the program and seeing them become extraordinary, just things connecting for them and them becoming engineers right before your eyes. So, and we stay friends. All of us stay friends. We, I have a gig this week at my barn, a private gig. Those guys will come, they'll get the venue ready for me, and they'll run sound, and, they'll participate in a lot of things that happen, and they jump on records with me after they graduate. And it's just a good time.
And I love it. How long is the program?
16 weeks.
16 weeks. Okay.
It's a normal semester. It's a trade school. Okay. We are THEC, the Tennessee Higher Education Commission. We're with an appointed post-secondary education model. So we take the GI Bill. We are working on student loans for our kids, because you can only get a student loan if you are a 4-year institution.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So we're working on alternatives for student loans for them, but we do currently accept the GI Bill, and we're working on making it more and more accessible to people. But it is just at its heart, it's a blast to be a part of. Me and Ron Petroff, a friend of mine who's a great engineer, great musician, great producer. we go through this program with these guys, and it's just it's the best part of my year. I was just telling you before we went on camera that I'm doing this record that's kind of like a Randy Newman vibe, and I'm also doing these other couple records that are more regular records, but the unexpected stuff is fun. You know, it's a real blast to be a part of records and projects that aren't the normal.
And we'll put information about Apprentice Academy below here. Now, you mentioned that in your early days, when you moved to Nashville, I spent a lot of time in the studio with you, and it was, I have to say, of everybody that I've worked with, Joe West has the best ears of anybody I've ever
Oh,
worked.
thank you.
So
it's such a relative thing to I appreciate it.
Your ears, Joe.
No, I appreciate it, but that is such a relative thing to say. I'll tell people when they'll send me mixes that, you know, there's records that I hate that other people love. You know, it's such a, but you know, I guess there is a sort of an averaging or an aggregate of the listening population, and thankfully I've got a sensibility and I guess a set of ears that people seem to fits nicely into that.
Yeah, I remember being in the studio with you, and I think it may have been during the Jimmy Wayne album. And I remember you had one of those egg shakers, and you had it mic'd, you were just tapping over the top.
Yeah, the many ways to use an egg shaker.
And another situation, you were singing background vocals, and you were singing this real high, not loud, breathy, something like that.
That's funny that you remember that. Yes, I was a designated ABBA singer on every record. You know, it's like, oh, well, let's do that part, but let's do it an octave up. You know.
Yeah.
But those background vocals, we did a thing. We redid Orleans Dance With Me. Was that who did Dance With Me?
Yeah,
Dance
that's
with
Orleans.
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah. We redid that for a movie with Jimmy Wayne.
I remember that. Yeah.
And there's some beautiful harmonies on that. And there's a lot of great harmonies on a Jimmy Wayne record. On Do You Believe Me Now? Those are a really nice group of harmonies. And we just sit there and, you know, and 20 tracks later, you got something that sounds pretty cool.
Yeah. One more thing. I remember I walked in and you had some drums soloed. And it sounded awful. It sounded like cardboard. But then you brought everything else in, and it was like, whoa, it was like angels, man. And I don't know what you were listening for in those drums, but as a failed engineer producer, it kind of amazed me. Observing.
Well, I guess we're all failed engineer producers because no one actually ever gets to where they want. Right? It's a relative term to say failed, because some people's failures would cause other people, their successes would be failures for other people. You know, make another engineer jump off the roof of a building if he had my career, let's say. You know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, but that's the beautiful thing about it. Is like, as long as people are interested in it, there's the art side of it, and then there's the hang side of it, where it's like, even if you're not great at it, you could hang out with some folks that love doing it, and it's like there's that side of it as well. So you get to have, you don't have to be George Massenburg. You know, yeah. I'm certainly not George Massenburg.
Actually, speaking of George Massenburg, he spent time here in Macon, Georgia, where I'm at. His father was a doctor here, and I guess his parents were divorced, so George Massenburg would spend summers here with his father. I emailed George last year or so, and corresponded with him a little bit, but yeah.
He's a great guy. We had him on our podcast, me and Mike Shimshak. Mike's another hit songwriter and record producer, brilliant guy living here in Franklin, and just a mensch. He's an awesome dude. But we have a podcast called From the West Barn where we just hang out and talk to people. And we had George on the program.
Oh, cool.
And I was nervous, you know. I mean, we had a run there where we were doing all the legends, you know, from Frank Filippetti to just a long list, you know, of all the guys that are sort of at the cool table at every AES convention.
Yeah.
And yeah, George was the last one. And George, you know, he's so smart. He's so smart that he can reveal how dumb you are, probably, with the questions you ask him. His responses could reveal the pure, you know.
He does teach recording arts at some university, Canada, I think.
I think in Montreal.
Okay.
if I remember correctly.
Well, let's get
And the inventor of the parametric EQ for all intents and purposes.
let's get an idea where you are musically, who inspired you. Name like 3 of your favorite artists.
Well, yeah, that's a good one. I grew up essentially in the 80s, right? Born in 69. So most of my music years were in the 80s. But I'm a big fan of a lot of AM radio, so there's an era of like Carly Simon, James Taylor, Bread, Paul McCartney and Wings. I didn't get into the Beatles till I got older and sort of got a taste for it. But a lot of that sort of the Eagles, soft rock, melodic, which you can hear in all those songs that me and Hanish made. It's like that's the center of my universe in regards to things that indelibly, when you hear the song, it takes you back to a moment. That's what's entrenched in my DNA. But then in the 80s, I got really into the rock world. I just loved the way rock felt, and to make rock records was always so much fun. I was kind of good at making rock records, naturally. So I ended up sort of thriving in that world for a period and did a lot of rock records like the Flyleaf record and just tons of records like that, Dropping Daylight. The list goes on, but there's something that happens behind a mixing console with rock that doesn't happen in country per se, and so that was fun. But most of my formal, if I want to go to what I love about music, it's the James Taylors of the world. It's good sort of melodic lyric content, but just outstanding recordings. That's part of the production for me has always been the recordings. Nashville's come a long way in that regard. The recordings didn't matter. Production really didn't matter back when I moved to town, or a little bit maybe before I moved to town. But they caught up real quick. And now, there's guys that come into a room with just a laptop and they might just make some beats and put some keyboard pads behind what you're doing, but they'll get a third of the song if there's 3 people in the room, which is I'm 100% for. If they're in the room because they make great tracks, for me, half the production is the way it sounds and feels. So Nashville's come around to that, I think. But that's sort of where I come from and what I've always wanted music to do for me. When you sit down to do something, you're trying to re-stir some musical thing that's down, some seedling of where you came from.
Right.
And they always, when I work on records, they all seem to gravitate towards those home bases.
Yeah. You mentioned Flyleaf. I remember you and I went to see Flyleaf at Bridgestone.
Oh, right. Weren't they in town with me at that point? That's when I was doing that one acoustic thing for them.
You were doing something for them.
Yeah.
But I remember I think it was the bass player jumping off the amplifier and going crazy.
It was like the top of an SVT.
Yeah.
And they were up on risers. So he was jumping, like launching off them and going, he had to be 10 feet in the air. Right. And I was just imagining my ankles turning into powder when I landed if I were to do that.
So James Taylor, stuff like that. So you said your influence is from the 80s. So your
70s and 80s.
70s and 80s. So your favorite year of music would have been what?
Well, I'll tell you, my favorite song is Bye Bye Miss American Pie.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And I think that was probably early 70s, right?
Well, it was whatever it was ubiquitous on AM radio whenever I was in the back of my dad's station wagon, So that's one of those songs that's just sort of sewn into my brain via my ear, so that would probably be you get this thing that music is just a part of you, and then you got the stuff that you like, right? And that would be the part of you side, all that early stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay, so the name of this show is Why Music Sucks, and it's generally about comparing today's music to the music of the 70s and 80s, and going back to the 60s.
I've already tipped my hat as to what I think, I guess. Well, I don't think music. I think music always sort of I don't know. And for as much as I hate country music, every once in a while you're guaranteed a couple great songs to come through that format a year, which is more than I can say for a lot of formats. So I'm not one of these guys that's a hater on the format. I always used to get mad when Luke Bryan was on the radio because one of my songs wasn't on the radio, like whatever. So I had this chip on my shoulder about like, that's 3.5 minutes the world will never get back when they could be listening to one of my songs, you know, because you're fighting for that time on the radio.
Yeah.
But I don't know, you know, I think that the going from, there's a book called Mansion on the Hill. I don't know if you've read it.
I have.
I think the byline of that is like the collision of rock and commerce. I forget who wrote it. Do you remember who wrote it?
I do not remember who wrote it.
But it's sort of talking about how the music business went from finding and developing artists into quarterly reports owned by major corporations, right? So it was like they went from finding a James Taylor or a Van Morrison or a Beatles or the Who. They went from finding those bands and letting them do whatever they did to finding things that they could rely on quarterly, which was like, hey, let's have another bottle of Coca-Cola slide down when someone pulls this bottle of Coca-Cola out. So you got the Britney Spears and the Jessica Simpsons and the you know, you keep, you know, Genie and the Bottle Girl, you know, Aguilera.
Yeah.
And you just had these people that were just essentially popping up with the same records.
Yes.
Right. And formats got really, really tight with that. I think that playlists are helping with that. I think that when you get to a decentralized format programming like what's on Spotify, I think it's kind of cool because now where they would say you won't fit on a radio station, it doesn't matter what fits. Anybody can listen to what they like. But I think that was part of what I would say was an unhealthy outcome for the music business. The music business became run by guys in boardrooms that needed outcomes. And we lost special, unique things like, you know, everybody was different. When you listen to Joni Mitchell versus Mama Cass, you listen to the uniqueness that was then. I wish we had more of that. And we do have some of it, but it's like you might have some really cool songs that come out, but people don't seem to have these long, long careers where you get to see their artistry bud.
Right.
And all of these cool artists now, like Billie Eilish or somebody who sang Somebody That I Used to Know. It kind of sounds like the guy from Colin Hayward from
was that David
well, we can't remember his name. That's a good, the reality is he hasn't had enough of those for us to say, oh, that was James Taylor, right?
Yeah.
But it was a great song. It was really interesting. And I think there's plenty of great art going on, but we don't get enough of it or enough time to focus on it because there's so much noise around it that we get to really appreciate them as a full artist and be able to remember their name in this podcast.
Yeah, I'm currently reading a book called Dirty Little Secrets of the Record Business. And the subtitle is Why So Much Music That You Hear Sucks. So it does go into the corporate aspects of the executives of the music industry. So
yeah, I mean, I get it. They've got to guarantee returns for people. But in that book, Mansion on the Hill, they talked about Born to Run was the first record certified platinum. So I don't know if that meant that certification didn't exist prior or if that meant that no one had sold 1 million records yet.
I'm pretty sure somebody had sold 1 million records.
Well, you'd be surprised. After reading that book, they were talking about successful records selling 5,000 to 8,000 copies of something, right? People, that was very much like MC5 and these records, Buffalo Springfield, you know, records like, and I even like Jack Tempchin and I are buddies. He wrote with Don Henley. He was like his principal co-writer. And I was playing in a songwriters round with him, and Peaceful Easy Feeling only went to number 29, I think.
Oh yeah.
You know, so there's songs that I'm sure have way out earned my number ones, right? But,
right. Roxanne by the Police. It was like the same thing, but just in the 20s or something.
Yeah, and he wrote two. What's the other song he wrote? One of his hits, Peaceful Easy Feeling, and what other Eagles song?
Did he co-write Already Gone?
No.
Okay.
He wrote another hit, which escapes me right now, but one of them only made it to 29. And the other one didn't go to number 1 either, it was like number 22 or something. And
New Kid in Town, does he?
No, it was an old classic. It was an old classic. So I just think the music business hadn't got fired up and focused into a sales model yet, right? They didn't have distribution. They didn't, for whatever reason, it was like once they got into that world where they started selling 1 million, I can remember a thing. I can remember we were trying to get Dave Behanish a record deal in New York City, and a noted record executive that I won't say his name, who was the president of a big label in New York, was a subsidiary of a major, was very, very into it. We had done a record called Shine. It was right around that era. And he came out to see Dave play. And I remember he said this to me. He said, "Do I think I could sell 1 million copies? Absolutely. I need to sign things that I can think will sell 10 million copies."
Oh my gosh.
So there was an era where that was like, that was what all A&R was doing, was looking for bands to sell 8 to 10 million copies. So we've gone full circle through that with the deconstruction of the music business, but it's like, that's the mentality of these people. And they don't care what it is. They'll put Yoko Ono out there on the record label. They'll put anything out as long as it moves records at the end of the day. And I guess we have to accept that as part of, it's part of doing commerce, part of doing what we do.
Yeah.
But the reality is there's still great art out there. And I'm the kind of person that I can't get too watered down and live too much in the world that music sucks, because there's still some good examples of music, and I want to make music that's great. And if I get into that mindset, it kind of defeats me, and I end up being a dude that turns bitter and stops creating.
All right. Well, I'm going to read something to you. Are you aware of this article that came out recently that said that 70% of the music business now is old music?
Yeah.
All right.
I am. And I wonder, I think you're a good person to ask this. Hasn't it always been that way? Hasn't catalog always floated the music business?
Maybe. I'm generally not on the record label side.
Well, on the publishing side.
Well, I am on the publishing side, but
publishing side, that's mostly catalog that carries these companies. When you even have, like, in what they call P1 radio, when you have a hit song, they'll have a station that literally plays 20 songs.
Yes.
A radio station. But what they don't tell you about that is they play 20 new songs. They also play another 30 recurrents, 30 old songs. So even at those hit radios, the people that are having number ones today at terrestrial radio, those stations play more old songs than they play new songs. I know that, think about 22 songs. You could play 22 songs in about an hour and maybe an hour on the radio, depending on commercial breaks, right?
Yeah.
So that would mean that you'd be playing the same songs 24 times in a row, right? So they pepper in these old songs, but the vast majority of even radio stations that are touted as playing the new songs are playing mostly old songs. So I don't know how surprising that number is. It's one of those things you wonder if the statistic is just being looked at through a different lens.
Well, all right, I'll read just a couple of lines from this article. It says the 200 most popular new tracks now regularly account for less than 5% of total streams. And just 3 years ago, it was 10%. So the new music is
but it is forgettable. It is forgettable. And I will tell you that whenever I do go in the car to, like, drive up to Pittsburgh for a holiday, if I'm listening to, like, a country radio station, I literally will, like, go into a trance, and I'll come out of it, be like, is this the same song? You can't tell the difference. Even with a band that has, like, 3 lead singers, you can't even hear the difference in their voices. So the country radio and popular radio just doesn't have the heart, doesn't have the connection that these old songs had. They were literally artists versus performers versus people coming into the rhyme game now that just spit out the same exact thing that you heard the other guy do. So I can see why people would become disinterested with it.
Yeah. Elsewhere in this article, it's by a guy named Ted Gioia. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but he says, never before in history have new tracks attained hit status while generating so little cultural impact. In fact, the audience seems to be embracing en masse the hits of decade past. Success was always short-lived in the music business, but now it hardly makes a ripple in the attention spans of the mass market. And I look back 50 years ago, 40 years ago, and I think I probably remember most of the top 40 songs. And I'm wondering if young people today,
Right.
30, 40 years from now, will remember.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Well, here's another thing. People always talk about in the recording culture and in the song culture, people always talk about analog tape like it was a beautiful thing. And it was, but there was a ton of crappy records made on analog tape that sounded horrible. A lot of those 90s rock records were done on analog tape that were so thin in the big can snare drums and the bright guitars. Same thing with music. You know, there's for every Hotel California, if for Let It Be, there is a do run, 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 a do run, run. There is the Leif Garrett's and the Sean Cassidy's that people were all skating to. You know, there was a lot of stuff that we just don't. Here's the realization is we don't have the genre of artistry today that has a spotlight on it. The Ray LaMontaignes don't seem to have the audience or the outlet through corporate America where they're actually getting real eyeballs and getting money put behind programs that promote that. They aren't being shown in that showcase where you have really the artists that would have been from that era. They
Yeah.
still exist now. There's just they've taken their genre and completely shrunk it down into you got to go search for it under a rock somewhere. You're not going to get it naturally.
Yeah. And I'm sure there have been music scenes like Seattle and Athens and such in the last 20, 25 years, but I'm not really aware of like a new title for a scene like grunge or Southern rock here in Macon, and that people really get behind. And you mentioned when you drive, you listen to radio. Do you listen to radio much?
Never.
Okay.
Never. Like I never listen to FM or AM. Occasionally on the road, I'll hit the scan button just because I'm bored out of my mind. And mostly that's AM stations looking for like Prairie Home Companion or something interesting to listen to, right?
Yeah.
But I will listen to like a playlist on Pandora.
Okay.
Or if my son's in the car, he'll operate the radio with Spotify, right?
Right.
But the country stuff I'm listening to is probably off of local as you go through a radio station area, you know, listening, just scanning through and seeing what's on the dial.
Yeah.
And that stuff, like I said, it's just like, it's completely forgettable.
So
After the 3.5 minutes, you don't think about it again.
do you find new music like on Pandora and Spotify? Is that
no, I find new music like, and this is embarrassing. I've stopped watching the news because it's pathetic. You know, it's unbearable to watch the news,
yes,
right?
I have absolutely done the same thing.
It's just like you can't. My wife and I talk about it. It's like all the bad news. If there was something that they put at the end of the bad news that was, here's what you can do. You know, come help us at the food bank. Come, you know, bring this and we'll send it over in a container there. But it's just unbearable to watch, right?
Yeah.
So I get my news when it becomes popular enough that it takes over a timeline, like Facebook. Then I'll look into a story. Yeah. Right. That's how, like, once I see it more than a couple of places on my timeline, I'll be like, okay, what's going on there? That's how I find my news, because if enough people are talking about it, I assume like, okay, there's something really going on here. Right. And then you can try to find out what the story actually is rather than what they tell you on TV. Yeah. So, you know, my music, I get that way too. It's like when a song is so good that either my son tells me about it. I get a lot through my son at 17 years old. He's listened to a lot of music. Or someone sends it to me and says, you got to hear this, or it creeps. It's so pervasive that it creeps into my timelines, or people, you know, secondhand. It has to be referred for it to get onto my radar. And then it has to be huge. You know, we've got so much noise, thousands of songs written every day, let alone released. I mean, there's just tons of music coming at you. So you've got to find a way to parse it and get to the stuff that you're listening to. Plus, like the story says, I listen mostly to old catalog. I listen to old records.
Yeah, but you're a songwriter writing new songs, and you're a producer producing new records. And like that article said, if only 5% of streaming is new stuff, that's got to be somewhat discouraging.
Yeah, I mean, discouraging is an understatement when it comes to songwriting. If you're doing it for any rationale that has to make sense, you wouldn't do it. So you do it as a byproduct of always doing it. I mean, I wrote songs for 20 plus years before anyone cared about them.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're going to do it for 20 years, you're going to keep doing it. I will tell you that they've demonetized songwriting so devastatingly that you don't really have the ability to just be a songwriter anymore.
Right.
And from terrestrial radio, where we actually had some good agreements in place, right, that actually compensated you. It used to be like you got a song on a record and you can make 40 grand just from the mechanicals if your song wasn't a single.
Exactly.
And then it was like, well, that's not happening because there's no record selling. So you have to get the single, but at least you could make $1 million at radio your first year if you had a big hit.
Yeah.
Now I've been hearing, because I haven't had a hit in the last 2 years, 3 years, I've been hearing that hit singles are making 150 grand all in, all total copyright. I don't know how true that is.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Well, the record labels have seemingly de-emphasized radio, that they're promoting more to social media now. And of course, social media doesn't pay.
Well, that's a neat little trick too. I mean, the record companies leverage the catalogs that are owned by them and the artists to be able to get ownership in the streaming platforms that they don't share with the artists.
Yeah.
So the artist, will have, like, I have a bunch of songs they still get streamed hundreds of thousands of times per quarter, if not millions. I mean, when I very rarely go down into the deep abyss of my royalty statements,
Sure.
but they're nothing. They're like, you certainly couldn't provide for a family on them. I've got three radio number ones, and here we are. If you look at those royalties from those 3 number ones, not enough. They're definitely not enough. It's
Yeah.
nice jewelry money, if anything.
Yeah.
So the labels, though, make a ton off the master side. When the master gets spun and they own the master, you don't own the master, the labels own it, so they use this nice little, it's kind of a conflict of interest for them to leverage your asset to get gains for them, but not for you.
Absolutely.
That's what they've done. And when they've taken, terrestrial radio is not even consequential now when you look at the pie graph of royalties.
Right.
So, let's say that let's say it's 200 grand, right, for number one.
Yeah.
Most songs are at least 3 ways with full publishing deals. It goes into 2 how many times? 6 times 3 is 18. 6 times 6 is, we'll say $35,000.
Yeah.
$35,000 for number one.
Yeah.
You won't have to pay taxes. That's the upside of it. You're below that mark at which you have to pay taxes.
Yeah.
You'll get your return back, and you'll be right as rain.
Yeah.
But you can't rely on a number one. I mean, with everything, Nashville has shrunken down to a small group of people writing these songs as well. So where it used to be that there were thousands of songwriters in town with pub deals, there's less of people with pub deals, and there's less people actually. It's all sort of kept in-house now. It's like, if you're not on the record label side or in the production team side or in the artist group side, you're going to have a tough time getting on the records.
Right. In 2012, Billboard magazine changed their charting system to include, basically before that it was sales and radio airplay, but then they started including social media and streaming. And that's one of I remember telling my students at Middle Tennessee State University that this was going to change things fairly drastically. And since then, like huge country stars like George Strait, Alan Jackson, Toby Keith used to have tons of number ones. They've had no number one since then. How does that impact you as a songwriter and a producer?
I don't know, Tim. I got to tell you, I'm not all that interested in making popular records. I'll do them if they come on my calendar and I think that the artist is good. And if it's going to make sense in regards to what I need to do. I've got a mission statement that says that one of the key things for me in deciding to make big decisions like taking gigs would be like, does it provide for me and my family?
Yeah.
That's one of the key things. So the other ones are, I strive to be part of records and creative processes that are better than me, that I'm an essential part to, that couldn't be great without me. Right. Yeah. And to provide for my family. So I will take those records, but I got to tell you, I'm not all that, if the money wasn't there, I don't think I could take them. Right. But I will get excited about an oddball off project, off genre kind of thing, like this Randy Newman thing, or like this, I just did a poetry. Carlos Andres Gomez is a brilliant poet from New York City. Him, Brent Shuttleworth, who's a great artist, independent artist and producer and songwriter, and me did this project with Andreas, and we filmed it, and we went into the studio album where we did his spoken word to like a music score that Brent and I put together. And it also has like Foley / sound effects. And then we shot it, did videos of them as well, of the performances. But I'll do that every time. Like, I'm in for that. It's interesting. It's challenging. It hasn't been done before. It's true art. It's what I imagine people were going into the studio thinking that way about music back when Van Morrison was making records. They were just trying to capture something. Whereas now when we go into a studio for a regular record that you'll hear on the radio, there's not one inspired person in the room. Everybody knows. You talk to these session musicians, they want to quit and leave town. They are bored out of their minds making these records. The producers, the engineers, even the artist. I mean, so much of it is the joy has been sucked out of it because there's no creative. You are so limited by what you can make in the studio. The outcomes, you already know them before you go in for the first day.
Yeah.
So I've been trying to steer away from records like that. And it's like, I don't need any more paper success. I mean, money is important. I'll work for money, but everything I've ever done has been for joy. All the things that made me money. I did that Joey and Rory record because they were friends of mine.
Sure. Yeah.
I did it because they needed a place to record. They were friends of mine. I'd done previous records for them. And I was the one guy, probably, I was a perfect fit to put that record together.
Yeah.
Because she was in a state where she wasn't able to just come in the recording studio. So a lot of that had to be pieced together from different vocal takes she had done along in a bus, in a hotel room, in a studio as a rough take. So I took that record on, not because I thought it was going to win a Grammy and sell over 1 million copies. I took it on because it was like, I knew I was perfect for the record. I wanted to help my friends. And I thought it'd be a really great record to make some nice art.
Yeah.
And it went on to win a Grammy. Yeah. Right. So, I think if you always follow your arrow, which is like, I want to be a part of records. I'm going to find a way to make those 1 or 2 songs that cut through a genre and actually mean something. Yeah. The kind like, that everybody else always talks about, The House That Built Me.
Yes.
Tom's song. Right. You talk about, and Alan Shamlin, of course. You talk about these songs. You're still able to do it. So why not shoot for those? Make the records that are fantastic. Me and Dave, our songs got cut by artists. None of our songs were co-written. None of our songs were polluted from camps. They got cut by artists because they wanted to say that. They wanted to sound like that. And it was like, it's rare to get a song cut that the artist doesn't stick their nose in and try to take the publishing or try to write with you.
All right, well, let's talk about that. And I wasn't going to talk about that in this particular episode, but it got to a point where you basically almost had to write with the artist to get a cut on an album.
Yeah.
So what is your feelings there?
Well, I think they do that, right? So it was like the old days in New York when you're making these records like Matchbox 20 record, they really wanted two songs. They needed 2, a hit and a follow-up hit. And they wanted a 3rd hit, but they didn't care what the other 8 songs in the record were.
Right.
And that's kind of what Nashville did. It's like they didn't care, so they let the artist write them. The artist will write a good song with good songwriters. You and I could sit in a room today and we could write a song that could be a top 10 song. And who knows, but is it a great song?
Right.
Is it like a great song? No, that's when they went outside. And I think that's why me and Panish, they cherry picked those couple songs from us that were great songs that the artist wasn't going to write.
Yeah.
You know, because Keith, why wouldn't Keith write the song? Well, he just didn't write that one, but it was one that he wanted to say and he couldn't get away from him. So you have those songs as a songwriter that you write. Maybe if you're lucky, you have 1 or 2 a year that are just special songs.
Right.
And those songs still get cut. And that's why I'm saying shoot for those songs. But the reason why artists write the majority of the record is that they put them with good songwriters. And
Yeah.
some of the artists are really good songwriters too. So they're going to write the normal stuff that you and I could write. And why would they choose mine and your song over the one that he wrote with his buddies?
Yeah.
That is like kind of the same kind of good song,
Right.
right? They could run up the charts if they needed to, but you know, it's not a special song. So that's why there's still a market for special songs, I think.
Yeah. But I mean, George Strait started writing songs. He'd never really written songs, and in the last 10 years,
Well, he wrote Troubadour, didn't he?
No, that was
I
Leslie.
thought he wrote it with his son and is it
No.
Leslie Thatcher?
Leslie Thatcher and somebody else who wrote.
Okay, I thought he wrote that. You know, Troubadour was #1 before the week before Do You Believe Me Now?
Oh, really?
Or the week after, or the week in the middle, because we were #1 for 2 weeks, then went off, then came back as #1 for a third week.
Okay.
But Troubadour was on one of those donut hole openings there. But
Yeah.
I just thought that was interesting because Troubadour, there was never a bigger dichotomy in #1 songs than Do
Yeah.
You Believe Me Now to Troubadour.
Right.
You know, it was truly the handwriting on the wall that the music sound was about to change in Nashville.
Yeah. In the last 20, 25 years or so, can you recommend an artist that you would hold up there with artists of 60s, 70s, 80s?
Oh, there's tons of them. But they are just, there's nothing that really allows for them to have the foreground, right? There's so many that you don't remember. The art is still out there. There are still great songwriters. I see them all the time. I see them sometimes when I play live. There's people that just blow your mind. I'm trying to think of a good example now. Yes, they're absolutely there. Are they ever going to get the spotlight, you know, like the others? No, the spotlight costs. Just like they figured out how to use your own data against you on Facebook and sell it back to you.
Right.
You know, the spotlight is paid for. Spotlight is a commodity. And I hope rock has a big resurgence. I think it's due.
It is due.
I think rock is due. And I think that organic really, and it's out there. It just hasn't got the spotlight.
Something new needs to come along.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. And part of me not being able to really rattle off a list of 5 to 10 people shows that I'm not listening to a lot of the new music, but it also shows that it just isn't out there. I could name a ton of all kinds of different genres, but not that genre because it's just not focused on, like what we were talking about earlier.
Well, name somebody you've worked with over the last 15 or 20 years that you would recommend people listen to that maybe hasn't been big in the spotlight.
Well, you know, one of my favorite bands in the world was the Gathering Field, band that got signed to Atlantic Records when I was a younger kid, and I made a lot of records with those guys, but they were Bill Deasy was the lead singer. Dave Brown was a producer and guitar player. Rita Fade and Eric Riebling, just like a true band that wrote music like no one else.
Yeah.
And eventually, you know, they never really got their due. They were on the same label as Matchbox 20. So, you know, Matchbox 20 kind of took off and they didn't. But yeah, the world would be a better place if they listened to those records. You know, the old records me and Dave Bahanish made were stellar records.
They were.
If people would listen to those records, they would be better for them. You know, they were special records.
I remember when I first heard it, and it was like I'd been looking for something for a long time.
Right.
And there it was.
Yep.
The Dave.
It's a beautiful thing about music. You can't define that. And it was like, we have a catalog of maybe 1,000 songs. I don't know, a ton.
Yeah.
We've been writing for 20 years. Jamie Teachner, he and I made a record with a project we put out of just a lot of songs we had written that felt like a band project called Lo-Fi. That's an extraordinary record.
Yeah.
But Jamie Teachner, as on his own right, is an incredible artist. And he does something no one else does. I think Casey Musgraves is great. I think that Miranda Lambert is great. I think they're writing and producing great songs that for some reason radio won't play. I don't know why Casey Musgraves and Miranda Lambert can't get a #1 without putting a guy on them as a duet. Miranda, very rarely does she go in the top 10.
So is it still that way in Nashville where the females are getting the
well, I think that from the old school way of thinking, their radio, what do they call it? The demographics of radio, were mostly women listening to country music, right? So maybe they weren't as prone to want to listen to girls singing. So maybe that was their rationale. But there was all these cloaks of reasons why they wouldn't do what they would do. They had radio consultants and they had all this charting. But at the end of the day, I think that's the good thing about Spotify, because people choose what they want, individually programming their own playlists.
Sure.
So terrestrial radio kind of wouldn't play. If you were working to get on a record as a songwriter, if you're writing female-oriented songs, you were writing for 10% of an impossible market. So like to get a song on a regular record on country radio was a miracle. To get it placed with a woman that's going to get on the radio was 10% of that miracle. Right. So as a songwriter, you were only writing female songs if you were in the room with a female that was releasing a record and you were trying to get on that record.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much of it is chicken or the egg, but I think that those records are extraordinary records. I think the Maren Morris stuff is really great too. But yeah, there's a lot of really great stuff that just doesn't seem to, people don't like what I like,
Well, sure.
I thought that song by Sam Hunt, Cop Car, it didn't go to #1. I don't think it even got close. I think it was maybe 11, maybe 9. But I was just blown away that song wasn't a hit.
Yeah.
Because I thought it was a hit, but who knows why things go up and go down and who gets played and who doesn't get played.
Yeah. All right. An album that you had, I won't mention the artist name, but an album you had success on, you had written a song on it from 2010. It had 8 songs on it. No song had more than 3 songwriters, and it was a great record. Fast forward 10 years, the same artist releases an album. The album has 15 songs on it. One of the songs has 7 songwriters on it, and there are 16 producers on it. What is going on?
Right. I don't know that that's as bad as it sounds. The process of making music is very different now. So let's say you have 7 songwriters. This is how 7 songwriters happen. 2 people start a song, or 3 people start a song, and then they bring in somebody to work on the track. Now it's 4 people. And then that person calls up somebody else, and sooner or later you've got 4, 5, 6, 7 people on a song, right? And then you might have some people that weren't even in the room but are part of management, and the artist jumps on. Who knows? I mean, it happens it's a slippery slope, right? And 1/7 of the new pricing revenue is, you better get yourself a payday loan. But so I think that happens, and I think the producer thing has more or less happened, and they've gone away from like the Mark Brights and Dan Huffs of the world. Not that Dan Huff is struggling for gigs, but that model, the Tony, what's Tony, the famous producer Tony
Brown.
Tony Brown, that world of producer, Garth Fundis, where you came in and made a record with a guy. Now it's like you go right with a songwriter, and it's like they start doing tracks, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, this thing kind of feels like it's done. So why don't you're producing it?
Well,
track guy is producing it.
Speaking of that, a lot of songs that you've had cut sound like the demo, which means basically you were the producer.
Yeah.
of the song.
I'm glad. I wouldn't want them to change it. I think it's best that way. So I'm happy with it, you know?
Okay. All right.
And hey, those songs paid well. We were at the end of that tidal wave of radio money. They all paid very well. So we're lucky. Whatever,
your timing was good to be on the end
we squeaked right in.
of the good times.
But you know, you have to start thinking like, okay, do I want half or nothing? Is it in the best interest? What's in the best interest of the song? That they take all my licks and production and put it on the real record? Yes, it makes the song better. I'm fighting for the song always. And I'm not like going back and saying, hey, pay me to produce the record or list me as producer. You know, I'm just like glad the song did well. So at the end of the day, you've got to pick, you could find something to be offended about or feel like you have been muscled out of money. But at the end of the day, if you're always thinking about what the best thing is for the song, I'm there. I try to be there 100% of the time. What's best for the song.
Yeah.
So I don't mind if they do that. And you know, so all these producers are just a byproduct of people working on tracks and then submitting it, and then them going in and being like, why are we going to redo this? The demo's magic. Let's put out the demo. You know, so that's how you get 7, 10, 12 producers on a record. It's a more nature of the beast and the changing of technology than it is, you know, in the old days, people couldn't even afford to go into a recording studios, and they certainly weren't able to record anything releasable from home.
Yes.
You know, so you had producers that only lived in studios.
Yeah.
And now that world's changed. It's a paradigm shift. And I don't complain about paradigm shifts. I just go with them and figure out if it's time for me to leave yet, if I still have some value to bring, or if I don't.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? What am I going to get out of whining about it? I'll be one of those guys that I used to look at and say, why is he always complaining about, you know,
Well, I mean,
music business is a pretty good place to be.
It is a common thing in Nashville or other places, music places, to complain about the business. It's just the way things are. Well, let's end on a high note and tell us about winning the Grammy.
Well, I tell you what was great about winning the Grammy. I'll tell you, I was in Nicaragua, in the jungle of Nicaragua, at my buddy Jerry Goldenson, and then has a good friend named Nick Perdomo who has Perdomo Cigars. So he's got a farm up in the Esteli Valley in Nicaragua. So Jerry and I went down there, and we spent, I guess, a week down in the jungle seeing how he grows, touring his facility, and just hanging out with Nick. Nick's a good guy. And the record released that week, and we had very limited internet. You know, we did have internet. It was like dial-up, like old AOL. You heard all the modem sounds.
Right.
And I started getting people emailing me saying, hey, that record, we didn't expect anything. It was a record of hymns.
Right. And it was like on the independent Christian label. Is that right?
It was on the Gaithers label.
The Gaithers, yeah.
Yeah, but you know, in that world, they're big, you know, so they're a major in the Christian world, I would say. Right. I don't know. They sell a lot of product.
Yeah.
They know how to do that.
Yeah,
so we were in the jungle, and I started getting texts saying, that record's number 2 on Amazon. That record's number 2 on iTunes. And I was like, wow, that's wild.
And this is the overall chart, right?
It was, I don't know what it was in on the country charts.
On the country charts, okay.
Right. It was probably number 1 on the religious charts, you know.
Oh,
that record went on to be like an 18-week number 1 in the Christian world. Wow. It was a multi-week number 1 in country. It was the second biggest selling record of the year that year. Wow. In country. It was the number 1 record all genre for 1 week.
Okay, like, there you go.
The whole shooting match. Yeah. So I get home from Nicaragua only to find out that us being number 1, we ended up being number 1 on those online charts, only represented the digital sales. That record sold 70,000 copies the first week, 68,000 the first week were actual hard copies. Wow. So those 2,000 are what showed up on those digital charts.
Yeah.
So I was blown away that it sold 70,000. It sold 70,000 because they ran out everywhere. And the next week, I think it sold more. Right?
Yeah.
Record went on to sell over 500,000 just at Cracker Barrel. It was a stunning surprise because the story was so compelling, which is like a testament to what music should be.
Right.
Tell a great story,
Yeah.
and they did that. And it was incredibly rewarding because you didn't take the record for the logistics. No person in their right mind would do a record thinking it's going to be huge. That
Yeah.
record.
Yeah.
So it was karmically, it was a beautiful thing. And the other great thing was we got to go to Los Angeles. Me and my wife went to LA and went to the ceremony and sat there. We sat right next to Snarky Puppy,
Okay.
which I know some of those guys are good dudes. And right before they had put the names up on the screen, right before I'm not this kind of person either. I leaned over to my wife and I said, "We're going to win." And 5 seconds later, they announced us as the winner and got up on stage, got to do that thing that you, as a creator, it's like that big long thing you read about me at the beginning. You could just replace it with, he's a Grammy Award winner.
Yeah.
And that could have been it. That's how powerful that award is.
Yeah.
So it was a great thing to do creatively after a 30-year career, whatever I've been doing this for, to have that moment, be there with my wife, be able to go up on stage and thank my wife and my father who's passed away recently, and my mother, and my son, and be able to just sit there in that moment. And, it was an incredible night, incredible occurrence. The story was great record to be a part of.
Yeah.
So few things go right for you in the music business that when you do get one like that, if you can really just sit back and enjoy it, that's the key to success. That's being truly successful. So
Absolutely.
Lucky to have been a part of that.
Yeah.
A necessary part of something that was better than me.
A side note, you said it sold 70,000 the first week.
Yeah.
Recently, Tears for Fears released a new album. It was #1 all genre, and it only sold 29,000 copies the week it was #1.
Wow.
So I love Tears for Fears, but I don't think they should be the #1 act these days. And so
Is that a good thing? I guess maybe it is. I mean,
well,
maybe it's worrisome for the modern music, saying like, hey, what we're doing here isn't moving people.
yeah.
Maybe it will, maybe people will start signing records that are more special.
Yeah. Well, the demographics for streaming is it's more older people now, and so maybe
Isn't that interesting?
record labels would wake up and start.
You can't. That's the other thing. As a songwriter, people will come up to you, and one of the most frequently asked questions is, "How do you do it? Doesn't it frustrate you when that song that you wrote that I love so much, nobody cut it?"
Right.
And I tell people the same thing. It's, you write songs because they're to be written, and the ones that you love and have a heartache for, you have to let them go. Like you have to let an 18-year-old go.
Yeah.
Because it will kill you. It'll keep you up at night thinking about them. You have to let records go. You have to let them go out into the world. If people don't recognize them and they never get their due, you have to be able to clear yourself up to do the new record. Because if you keep thinking about what could have been or should have been and get bitter about it, you aren't doing what you should be doing for the next year. It just will clog you as a creator. So it's both as a songwriter and record producer and person who puts out content. You have to let it go out in the world. If people don't get it, you have to be okay with it. It has to be good enough for you to get the satisfaction out of having made it.
Yeah.
To be able to truly do it again. Otherwise, you'll slowly stop doing creative things until you're paralyzed doing nothing.
Yeah. Joe West, give my love to Kim and Zach, and it's great to speak to you. We haven't spoken in quite a while. I've left Nashville three and a half years ago. So, but thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me.